Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here on my next Avatar weekly discussion topic. And apologies for not doing one of these in a while. Just had some pretty crazy weeks the last couple of weeks. Obviously in the lead up and then release of Smoke and Shadow Part 1. That was kind of getting all of my Avatar focus for the last while. And then just in general my video schedule has been a bit crazy over the past few weeks with like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Season 3 finale and stuff like that. But hopefully I'll get them back to being weekly now going forward and get the schedule going a bit better. But this week's video is going to be on the topic of Iroh, so it's going to be another character discussion video. And a few people recommended I do this one, and surprisingly enough it wasn't a character who instantly came to mind as one I should do, but then when someone actually recommended it to me, I kind of realized I had a lot to say about Iroh. Let's get into this topic. Iroh is a fan favorite character in the fandom. He is far and away one of the most popular characters in the show, and for good reason. I would definitely rate him fairly highly myself, because he is that wise older character who knows what's going on. He is a really good kind of mentor, father figure guide to Zuko, who again is another really popular character. And then you get into the more kind of bending side of things, and he's a really, really powerful bender to go along with that, and a very spiritual man as well. So he really represents a lot of like what is really interesting about the Avatar universe. He's wise about the world and the four nations, wise about the spirits, has been through a lot as an older character. Just all of this stuff coming together. But in the grand scheme of the show, we don't know a massive amount about him. There are a lot of mysteries, kind of unresolved things about him that could definitely be explored if he got more focus in like a comic coming up or something like that. And it's definitely that sort of stuff that I think makes him so fascinating as a character, because we know a lot of specific key moments in his life, but don't necessarily have all of the kind of ways to connect them together, like the exact order of how things played out, how exactly he changed from being, the crown prince of the Fire Nation, leading the assault on Ba Sing Se, to now being one of the most knowledgeable people in the Avatar universe, one of the leaders of the Order of the White Lotus, which is another fascinating thing about him as a character. That journey, we know some key points and can assume a lot of stuff about how he got from one place to the other, but we don't know exactly, and that's what definitely makes him fascinating to me as a character. Just that in the grand scheme of things, we mainly know him as a character who supports the other characters, who's always giving advice to others. We don't know about him. Like, we kind of, it's almost to the point where we want someone to give him some advice. We'll start off with the bending powers and stuff like that. Get that out of the way so we can focus on more plot-focused stuff. But I'd almost go as far as to say as he is the most powerful firebender that we've kind of seen in the show. Maybe like taking the combustion benders out of the way, just because of that power, that ability being just pure power itself. But I would definitely at the very least say that Iroh is the character who has executed the most powerful firebending attack in the entire show. That being the Sozan's Comet assisted fireball that takes down the walls of Ba Sing Se, so he and the Order of the White Lotus can get in there and take it back. That to me is more powerful than Ozai's kind of mini comet thing that he uses against Aang, and more powerful than lightning generation and stuff like that. To me, that was just this perfect execution of a firebending attack. Used his breathing effectively, took his time, and just one really powerful attack just obliterated the walls. Not even like lava bending took down the walls that quickly. It took a whole squad of Dai Li to take down the walls another time. So there's that. He has basically the true way of firebending learned from the dragons. he can use lightning generation. He has the mind correct, good enough to do that, and is capable of teaching that to other people. That tells you something about the way he kind of operates, that he's kind of calm of mind, unlike Zuko. He has learned another separate lightning technique, a more defensive one, how to counter the technique that he knows how to do, that being lightning redirection. A technique he developed from his time kind of looking at waterbenders, which in itself is a really interesting idea, that there was a point in his life where he was in the water tribes and saw waterbenders and came up with the concept for lightning redirection. So you have all these ideas. He knows the true way of firebending, has the right philosophy for firebending. That makes him powerful in itself. But he also can do all of the really high level techniques as well. Lightning generation, redirection, and the very much emphasizes the breath control as being a key aspect of firebending, which it is. And unlike a lot of firebenders in the show, isn't just really aggressive and stuff like that. He has a kind of calmness. He can use firebending for offense or defense, and that makes him a big threat. We really haven't seen him fight in the series all that much, really. There was a time he got captured by the Earthbenders and was pretty amazing, using the chain basically and not much firebending. And then the few times we have seen him firebend, he's never really done it to necessarily fight super hard against anyone. But definitely, taking back the walls of Ba Sing Se was a big moment. And just a few other times he's done stuff like that. And then just, in terms of physical stuff, obviously he kind of buffs himself up towards the end of ATLA and manages to break out with it using firebending during the eclipse, which is very impressive, showing that, we may only see him as a kind of wise yet powerful old man, but he was a really big general. He knows how to fight and stuff like that, so that's most of the kind of physical techniques type stuff out of the way. So, getting into his character, again, it comes back to the fact that there are two aspects of his character. And I think Smoke and Shadow Part 1 is actually interesting with this, and that the couple of scenes that we get there reveal a little bit about it. And that I think before that, the way we kind of saw Iroh is that he wasn't as bad as Ozai, but he still thought the Fire Nation was, the ultimate thing, and he was doing everything he was doing for the sake of the Fire Nation. He was a little bit cruel, joking about how, you can come visit if I don't burn it down to the ground first and stuff like that. But you can see that there's still a kindness there, and that he was sending Azula and Zuko gifts and that sort of thing. Really cared about his son, which Iroh obviously didn't. Ozai obviously didn't. So, there was a hint straight away that he was different than Ozai, but still had some of that Fire Nation cruelty there. But it was the death of Lu Ten that really changed him. But at the same time, Ursa in Smoke and Shadow Part 1, when she meets Iroh, specifically tells him that you were the kind of one kind of beacon of hope within the family that I had. That the only happiness that she really had being in that part of this family were the kids, and then Iroh being like this one kind of kind person within that kind of royal family dynamic. So that is interesting. It just reveals that, and I think some of the little things about Iroh's kind of destiny tell us that he wasn't like an evil character. He didn't go from being evil to being bad. He had always had this dream that one day he would take over Ba Sing Se, and to make his destiny a reality, he thought that the way that was obviously going to happen was that I'm the Crown Prince of the Fire Nation, we're doing this thing, we're trying to take over the world, it would make sense that my destiny would become a reality by doing it for the Fire Nation through militaristic means. But that obviously turns out very badly, the whole 600-day siege of Ba Sing Se, and in the middle of this he loses his son, and there must have been a point here where he was really questioning his destiny here, that this is not how it was meant to happen. It was meant to be this really triumphant moment where I kind of fulfilled my destiny, did this really great thing, taking Ba Sing Se, but instead I've lost my only son and stuff like that. And then, you kind of start to bring up here, who's Lu Ten's mother then? Like, we've heard nothing about who Iroh's wife was, or whatever. And most people would go with the theory that she probably died giving birth to Lu Ten, and that's kind of why the death of Lu Ten is all the more impactful on Iroh, because kind of in a way the death of him is like losing the two of them kind of again. So there's maybe something to be said about that for sure. But it's, even if it's not necessarily the moment where he goes from being the bad Iroh to being the good Iroh, it definitely marks a kind of key shift in his character, in that he basically abandons being part of the Fire Nation royal family. Being the crown prince isn't something he cares about anymore. He basically just doesn't return back to the Fire Nation in the immediate aftermath of this, abandons the siege, basically giving Ozai the kind of birthright to the throne and stuff like that. And obviously we see how that plays out with Azulon and stuff like that, and what Ozai and Ursa are forced to do to get him on the throne. But Iroh wasn't kind of willing to kind of come back and be on the throne because of what happened. And I find that interesting, in that there was a certain level of ambition to him, but it wasn't to the point where he really heavily wanted to become Fire Lord, as far as we were aware, which is a pretty interesting thing about him in itself. Just that he, as far as we're aware, he never really wanted to be Fire Lord, yet he's kind of had moments where he's had to step in when Zuko's been busy to kind of be the kind of temporary Fire Lord, and he's got respect for what he's done. So interesting stuff there for sure. But yeah, and this is where you start to bring in a lot of the other little bits and pieces we know about Iroh, in that obviously the key shift is that I would say this is probably where he started to become more spiritual. The key point being that, when exactly did he go into the spirit world? This is probably the most mysterious aspect of his kind of past. How did he get into the spirit world? What are the details surrounding this, and how did this specifically change him? Because after this, clearly he gained some sort of a understanding of the Avatar is such an important person, and he begins to understand better the balance of the four nations, the powers and strengths of each of the four nations, and learns to learn from the other nations. That, he learns from the waterbenders to develop his lightning redirection technique. In terms of his own nation, he learns to basically channel the true way of firebending, learning from the dragons, and going as so far as to kind of create this legend around himself that he killed the last dragon to keep the remaining dragons safe, all the time knowing that the ancient Sun Warriors were still out there, as well as the dragons, and so on. Like, when did that happen? Did he know the true meaning of firebending before the death of Lu Ten, or not? When did he go to the Water Tribe? The idea that I'm getting here is that the death of Lu Ten basically caused him to abandon things and kind of travel the world in search of just something in the aftermath of his son's death. He clearly traveled a lot and learned a lot about the different nations, and just gained a perspective for where the Fire Nation is in the grand scheme of things. Before eventually returning to the Fire Nation and basically taking Zuko under his wing after obviously what happened with Zuko and Ozai, that Iroh had to kind of step in here to help his nephew, and using the respect that he had from his troops to basically get Zuko a crew, because Iroh was the one who got Zuko that crew that we see him with in the kind of first season of ATLA. That's not, Ozai didn't give him those guys. That they're all there because they respect Iroh so much that they're willing to kind of help the banished prince. And this is another key point, in that there's some level of, he even says it, that Iroh thinks of Zuko as his son, and Zuko obviously thinks of Iroh as something more than just his uncle. And that is just a relationship that is amazingly well developed over the course of the series. How well that works. And it's not just, this kind of really kind of fatherly type thing. It's the fact that Iroh really effectively advises Zuko throughout the series. And this is probably one of my favorite things about that dynamic. It's that Zuko has a really tough time making tough decisions, but Iroh never just directly tells him what to do. He guides him, gives him advice, but never specifically says, no, don't do that. Yes, do this. It's just kind of teaching him the correct kind of ways to do things so Zuko can eventually make the right decisions. There is that kind of moment, with like Laogai, where obviously he does get very angry and frustrated with Zuko, and kind of basically is just telling, what are you doing here? Do you really think you can solve everything by capturing Appa? How are you going to contain a sky bison yourself? You are in a place that you don't have any kind of support. How are you going to do this? You have not thought this through. The one moment of frustration that they have there, and obviously the whole reconciliation then, Zuko betraying Iroh and the reunion, just this idea that despite everything that kind of Zuko put Iroh through, Iroh has only ever wanted Zuko to make the right decision, only ever wanted to see him kind of become the person he thought he could be, and it's just a really well developed relationship over the course of the show. Definitely like the strongest kind of relationship we see Iroh have in the show, which brings me into I suppose more the mysterious point, in that okay, there's all these kind of key moments in Iroh's kind of life, his spirit world journey, when he went to the ancient Sun Warriors and when he went to the Water Tribe, but it's just this idea that we have never seen Iroh and Ozai speak on screen together. It has taken up to the Smoke and Shadow Part 1 to see Iroh and Ursa talk. We've only seen some brief moments of Iroh and Azula talking. That in the grand scheme of things, a lot of the key characters in terms of Fire Nation characters, Iroh hasn't really had a lot of on-screen time with them. He's had none with his brother. And I think this is probably one thing where, if we ever got a solo Iroh story, they could do wonders with this relationship, and that we don't really know too much about it, apart from the fact that Ozai seems to really heavily kind of laugh at the kind of philosophy that Iroh has about things, and then the way that Zuko begins to take on the ideals of Iroh, as seen when Zuko confronts Ozai, and Ozai kind of laughs about the whole idea of, peace and kindness being the way to kind of resolve things. You can sort of see how different the two brothers are. But for sure, you can see that one thing is just the idea that Iroh was the firstborn, but never really put a lot of care or attention or just about being the crown prince, that he never really wanted to be the Fire Lord. Whereas Ozai always wanted to be the Fire Lord, that he was jealous about the fact that he wasn't the firstborn, and what he had to do to obviously get on the throne, and what he did to do that is obviously well documented at this point in time. So you can sort of see that jealousy there, that Azulon clearly put a lot of focus on Iroh because Iroh was so amazing. We assume at the time during the Siege of Ba Sing Se, he could generate lightning and all this other sort of stuff, and was really powerful and knowledgeable, and Azulon could see that and was basically grooming Iroh to be the next Fire Lord, and not so much focus on Ozai. Whereas Ozai obviously focuses a lot on his second-born, and maybe that explains a bit about why Ozai never really cared too much about Zuko, because of his own kind of upbringing and stuff like that. But I would really like to see these two talk to each other, Iroh and Ozai, just to see what it would be like, because I just like to see Iroh or Ozai bring up something about their past. But at the same time, I can sort of see why they have not actually had them on screen together, because you kind of have to explore their past as siblings, And if they did that with Ozai, I think it would have brought out a kind of petty side of Ozai that would have taken away from the kind of type of character that he is. So I can sort of see why they're kind of keeping them apart and not delving into that all that much. And that's why I think an Iroh-centric story would be the only way to get that across without diminishing Ozai as a character. But there's little moments where like kind of Zuko says, "Why don't you fight Ozai and end this instead of and become Fire Lord?" And he kind of explains that even if I could beat Ozai, and I don't know if I could, it would just be a brother killing a brother to get the throne, which is basically the idea that Ozai would do that for sure if he was in my position, but I'm not going to do that because I know that you need to take the throne. You are young, you are technically next in line to the throne. You are the one who can change things. And I really like that about him as a character, that he was knowledgeable enough to see that. And, just in general, the idea that we, I suppose as fans, could probably believe that just based on the power of their attacks, that Iroh probably could beat Ozai, even with Sozin's Comet out. But Iroh is kind of so humble and nice that he's kind of doubting that. So, there's a lot of stuff about Iroh as a character. I'm not going to go on too much longer, just because there's so much to talk about, and I could probably do a second video on this, but for sure in the comments let me know what your thoughts are on some of the stuff I've said, maybe some of the stuff I haven't mentioned. We'll continue the discussion in the comment section, but as you can see here, really well developed in the show, despite a lot of the key aspects of his character and key points not being heavily developed. We know little bits and pieces about his story, little bits and pieces about his family and where he came from and stuff like that, but not a lot of the connecting tissue, really. We know who he is perfectly as a character right now. And I suppose the final thing I should mention is his appearances in Korra, that we get the idea that at some point when he knew he was dying, he meditated into the spirit world, and basically his spirit remains alive in the spirit world while his body is gone. And as we know, what's going to happen is that as long as Iroh stays in the spirit world, his spirit will become an actual spirit, and be more spirit-like and stuff like that. So that is really interesting, this idea that he is perfectly fine with communicating with the spirits, which makes me so much more interesting to find out the details around his first trip to the spirit world. But that was just really interesting. He's obviously this advisor to the Avatar in the spirit world, Korra specifically then. But fascinating character. I want to know so much more about him. In the comics right now, they're primarily using him for comedy, but there's some good stuff with him, as I said, with the Iroh Ursa scene. But I would like to get to see more plot, character-focused stuff focused on him at some point, and I think that probably won't happen unless they more or less give him a kind of comic series to himself, just because there's a lot to cover here. You have to cover a large time period to get it across, but I think it would sell well because he is such a fan favorite character. So gonna end the discussion video there. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts. Would you like to see basically an Iroh focused comic series or something like that at some point? Let me know what your thoughts are on what I've said in the video. And if you have any suggestions for other discussion topic videos to do, definitely leave them in the comments as well. But other than that, thanks for watching the video, and bye.